Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's lesson for this week. This is one of my favorite lessons of the entire semester, partly because I really enjoy teaching narration, and it's honestly my favorite speech, but also because I like to theme it around Harry Potter. I'm a huge Harry Potter buff. You've already known this. And for those of you that can't tell, I'd like to welcome you to the Slytherin Common Room, which is located near the basement of Hogwarts, close to the dungeons, underneath the Great Lake, which is that murky little green window over there. So I hope you enjoy our little ambiance while we learn about narration. So for those of you that have your wands, go ahead and give that a swish and a flick to get those pens to start taking notes. And for those of you that just want to watch and enjoy, grab your butterbeer and sit back and relax while we learn about narrations. So let me share my screen here. And we will get going. All right. So the thing that I love the most about the narration speech is you're really just telling a story. And stories are critical for the human experience. In fact, you could even argue that as humans, we are hardwired to tell stories. I mean, think about it. We grow up, mom and dad rock us in their arms. We read See Spot Run, Go Spot Go. We start from picture books to audio books to actually reading. You go all the way back to the beginning of time and you see stories in little scriptures on cave walls. We tell stories through dance around cave fires and campfires. I mean, we've been telling stories since as long as humans have been alive. So while the first speech that you did in this class was your Who Am I speech, and that was really just priming you to get to know us a little bit more, introducing us to a little bit about who you are. This is your first big speech of the class, where now you're going to explain a concept through the telling of a story. And what better narration to theme this lecture off of is Harry Potter, one of my favorite stories ever told. So before we really get into what your speech should be, I wanted to kind of just teach you a little bit about narrations, because there, in my opinion, isn't a really good chapter in your text about this. There's like a paragraph in your text in the chapter about the types of speeches, but it really just doesn't give narrations enough justice, especially since we're theming an entire speech off of it. So what we're going to learn today in this lecture is first what a narration is and why we would use them in a speech. Then we're going to talk about the types of narration you might give. And then finally, we're going to talk about the components of narration. And I think that part of this lecture is going to be, I don't want to say easy, but I think most of you would recognize it from, English class or literature or stuff like that. So let's go ahead and get started. First, narrations are stories that we use in speeches to exemplify, to illustrate, or to explain a claim or concept. So this is when we as a speaker introduces an idea, or we make a statement, or we argue a claim, and then we use a story to explain that claim or to illustrate it a little bit further. All right, so let's say you get to class, if we are in person and you get to class and you're soaking wet, I might be like, what happened? And you'll be like, I got caught in the rain. I got caught in the rain is a claim that you're making. It's a statement that you're making. You then use a narration to explain how you got caught in the rain. I tried to leave my house really quickly, and I got in my car and I drove here really fast. And then as soon as I got out of my car and I started walking through campus, it just started downpouring. And I was dodging puddles and trying to speed through all of the water, but it soaked me. My glasses are foggy. Would you mind if I went to the bathroom to dry up? That would be the narration that you use to explain the claim that you made. I got caught in the rain. But in order for a narration to be considered a narration, there has to be two essential elements. And the first one is there needs to be some sort of movement through time. So where we end is not where we began. And there needs to be an element of change. Not only do we end in a different place than where we began, but your characters are different characters. They're different people. They're different, whatever your characters are, they've changed somehow in the ending from who they were in the beginning. Maybe society has changed. Maybe laws have changed. Maybe your character's internal struggles have changed and they have a different outlook on life. But there needs to be some sort of movement through time, beginning, middle, end. And then there needs to be some sort of element of change, right? So why would we use a narration in an overall speech? Well, we'd use it for a couple of different ways. First of all, narrations are super easy to follow along with. As I've already mentioned, we've been hardwired to tell stories. People know how stories work. We know that there's a beginning and a middle and an end. We know that there's characters, there's a plot, there's a setting. I mean, this stuff isn't new to us. We've been learning about stories, you know, telling stories, reading stories since grade school. So your audience kind of already understands how a narration works, which makes it really beneficial to use in a speech. They also promote memory. And I'm not talking about the speaker will remember the speech more. I'm talking about your audience will remember what you said a little bit more if you attach a story to it. You know, you could say I got caught in the rain and I'm really, really wet. And that's kind of boring and dumb. But with your big explanation and your story and your narration about how you got caught in the rain and how bad it rained, that's going to be something I remember. And I'm going to go back to my office and I'm going to be like, oh, one of my students got caught in the rain. It must be raining really hard out there. So when you use a narration in your speech, we tend to remember the thing that you're using that narration to explain a little bit more. So that's really, really, it's a good thing to use a narration, especially when you're giving a speech about something complex, maybe a difficult technological aspect or a difficult law to understand. You throw a story in there to help your audience understand it a little bit more. Stories enhance audience interests. We like stories. We love listening to them. So it gives us a moment of your speech to kind of perk up and pay attention to you a little bit more. And they provide variety within a longer speech, particularly towards the end of the semester when you give your 9-10 minute persuasion speech. There might be a lot of facts. There might be a lot of argument. There might be a lot of statistics and numbers that you have in a speech. And throwing a story somewhere in the middle allows your audience to sit back, relax, enjoy the story, and not have to listen to all of this hard-hitting data. So if you're giving a speech or you're giving a lecture, you know, throwing a story in there towards the beginning, towards the middle, and towards the end really allows your audience to kind of calm down a bit, collect their bearings, and it does provide a nice variety in your speech. So your speech isn't all facts or all arguments. There's a nice kind of story in there. All right, but a story is not just a story. There's 3 different types of narrations. And the 3 that I'm going to be talking about today are the 3 types of narrations that you can give your narration speech about. So as you're listening to this, you might want to take note of some ideas about which one kind of catches your eye a little bit more. All 3 are fair game. Story does tend to be the more popular one to give. All right, but first, you could do a case study. Second, you could do a history, or third, you could do what we call a story. So let's go into these in a little bit more detail. All right, when we're talking about case studies, what we're talking about is a deliberate study of an individual. This individual is specifically chosen for a specific reason, and the narration only follows that individual. This is where changes are observed, and those changes are then analyzed in order to enhance our knowledge. And when I say individual, your narration doesn't have to be about a person. If you're doing a case study, your narration could be about an event. It could be about a building. It could be about a storm. It could be about anything. But in order for it to be a case study, this needs to be deliberately chosen, specifically looked at for a reason. You want to give a speech about a war, well, you've specifically chosen the War of 1812 because of what we learned from it and how that shaped what we view war in this country. So what I really, really like to look at this one is, you know, if we use a Hogwarts example or a Harry Potter example, we can look at Dumbledore. Dumbledore is regarded as one of the best, most skilled wizards of all time, but he was one of the most influential headmasters of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. That's like the principal. So if I have just taken over as headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and I want to know what it means to be a good headmaster, I might study Dumbledore. What did Dumbledore do while he was here? What did Dumbledore teach before he came? What was Dumbledore's area of expertise that brought him to Hogwarts in the first place? So because I'm taking over his role, I might want to know what he did in order to improve my job. So I might specifically choose Dumbledore because he's a headmaster that was influential and well-regarded, and I want to be an influential, well-liked, well-respected headmaster as well. So we're literally specifically looking at something, we're observing all of those changes, and then we're reporting what those changes mean. Case studies are all facts. No opinions, no arguments, no cute and clever, magical, you know, twists and turns. It's all facts. What happened? What did we learn from it? What does it mean? All right. So this is super objective. So nothing subjective if you want to do a case study. Histories, on the other hand, are a little bit different than case studies. Histories, like case studies, also must be based on historical events, phenomenons, people, crises, whatever, an individual, all right? And they have to be true. But unlike case studies, in a history, the speaker should be including various viewpoints and sources. So now we're not just looking at Dumbledore to see what it takes to be a good headmaster, but we're looking at Dumbledore, his predecessor, maybe McGonagall, who takes over as headmistress after Albus Dumbledore. We're interviewing the students who went to the school while Dumbledore was their headmaster. We're looking at newspapers that were written about Dumbledore's time in the castle. So we're kind of collecting a bunch of data from a bunch of different sources, and we're interviewing a bunch of different people to get their opinions on this thing, and then we're making an overall claim. All right, so here in a history, judgments and opinions from the speaker can be included. So this would be something, you know, maybe for a case study, we're trying to figure out how to be a good headmaster. So I look at Dumbledore, but in a history, I might ask the question, well, what makes a good headmaster? And I might talk about Dumbledore, and I might talk about McGonagall, and then make a judgment call at the end. Whereas a case study, I'm just focused on Dumbledore. A non-Harry Potter example, and an example that usually goes over really well because of how many people watch this show, is Grey's Anatomy. A lot of you talked about how you like Grey's Anatomy in emails and stuff like that, so I like including this in class. But there's two very different doctor shows that one is on the air, one is no longer on there. The first doctor show was House, and the show House was really much about what is inflicting this patient and how do we cure them from this ailment. So they look at the patient, they look at what the patient's been doing, they look at the research that's been done before. There's literal scenes in the show where they have their whiteboard and they're writing things and they're crossing things out. And the question of every episode is, how do we cure this person? It's very scientific, it's very factual based, it's very driven towards one ending. Then you have a TV show like Grey's Anatomy. Grey's Anatomy is not a case study. This is a history. Grey's Anatomy is very much, we're about to do open heart surgery, but what is open heart surgery? Who's the hottest open heart surgeon? And it's very character driven. So there's lots of different opinions and viewpoints and persons and McDreamies and McSteamies all in Grey's Anatomy, which is so much different than House. So if you wanted to give a history and have a bunch of different viewpoints, you want to go the Grey's Anatomy route. If you want to give a case study and be factual, you want to go the house route. All right, so really at the end of the day, a case study is specifically chosen, a study of a specific individual where we observe the changes and we make conclusions that are rooted in fact. Histories are, we're trying to answer this big question and we kind of look at different viewpoints and different sources. And then at the end, as a speaker, we make a conclusion based off of what we saw, all right? The final type of narration that you might tell is a story. And in this class in particular, this is the most popular one to give their narration speech on. Stories are a little bit different because they support abstract ideas. So while case studies and histories are seeking to answer a question, stories are seeking to kind of make meaning out of things we don't have the answers for. These are things like, what is the meaning of life? What is love? All right, we don't really have a conclusive answer that we can give. So we tell stories to get as close to that meaning as we possibly can. I mean, think about Forrest Gump, right? Life is like a box of chocolates. You're never gonna know what you're gonna get. And then the whole movie is a narration about how he thinks life is like a box of chocolates. So he's telling a story here that's rooted in his experience in order to make meaning out of his meaningless life. So that's what we use stories for. If you're gonna go the story route, it has to be detailed and dramatic. Case studies and histories are a little bit more rooted in facts, a little bit more rooted in time and place. But in stories, you're kind of making up this world. You gotta describe these characters. You gotta use that visual, like the vision and the imagery that you would see in literature. And I think the reason why stories are the most popular choice out of the three is because they can be fake. Your story that you tell for your narration does not have to be true if you want to go the story route. Obviously, it can be true, but it doesn't have to be. So you can give a story, you can make a story up as long as it follows the story arc and those kinds of things. All right, so hopefully you understand the difference between the three. If you don't, please let me know. But quick recap, case studies are factual, they're objective. You're deliberately picking a specific individual to observe those changes and then teach us something. Histories are also based on true events, but include multiple viewpoints, and you as a speaker get to make an opinion or conclusion based off of all of the information that you gathered. Stories support abstract ideas. They try to make meaning out of meaningless things. They're detailed and dramatic, and they can be based on true events or not based on anything true at all. All right, so those are the three: case study, history, and narration. So let's say you want to go the story route. Well, what do you got to do? You've got to follow the story arc outline. So here is the moment in class where I usually go, raise your hand if you've seen this before. And then everyone raises their hand and I go, 15 points to all houses, because you all know what we're going to be talking about. The story arc is this little kind of graph, I guess, outline of how every story should be told. Okay, so first you have an exposition or a stasis, and then that leads us into a rising action, which introduces us to the climax, which then unfolds a falling action before finally giving us the resolution. Okay, your exposition is the beginning of the story. Your resolution is the ending of the story, but something that might be a little bit new to you is this word stasis. All right, the stasis is essential in the story arc outline because it really is the first plot point that leads your characters into the rising action. So if you notice at the very beginning of the story arc outline, it's a flat line, all right? This is the stasis. And the reason why we call it the stasis is because as long as that line continues to stay flat, everything stays the same, all right? We're staying the same. Once upon a time, there was a boy and a girl, and they loved each other. Stasis. They'll continue to love each other forever until a challenge occurs. This challenge is the bottom of the story arc, the start of the rising action that then causes the incline in the arc. Once upon a time, there was a boy and a girl who loved each other, but the girl's father said, you cannot date this boy because he's from the one family in town we hate. Uh-oh, what stops the boy and the girl from being in love forever? The father, who says you cannot fall in love with this boy. Without a challenge, you have no story. The challenge is the very first part of the story arc outline. Then our characters go up the rising action. If you couldn't tell, I'm talking about Romeo and Juliet here, right? So our characters realize that they're not supposed to fall in love with each other, but they fall in love with each other anyways, and they create an idea of how they're gonna get married behind their parents' backs. They bring in the nurse, they bring in the priest, they have all of these places that we're gonna meet. And all while this is going on, characters are fighting each other and other things are happening. So your rising action is essentially the plot of the story. But I want you to think of the rising action as a series of sequential challenges, all right? Because if there's not multiple challenges, then why would we be climbing up? It would just spark and then flatline again, right? So Romeo and Juliet can't fall in love because they need to get in contact with the priest first. Then the priest doesn't want to marry them because what they're doing is wrong. Then the priest says, oh, okay, well, you know what? We will get married. Oh, but then Romeo kills Tybalt and now Romeo's got to be banished. Oh, and now the priest and the nurse come up with a way to bring Romeo back, but Juliet's got to drink this potion that makes it look like she's dead. Oh, but they don't get the letter to Romeo that tells Juliet she's not actually dead. It's just a fake potion. So when he sees Juliet in the tomb, he thinks that she's really dead, so he kills himself. Oh, he kills himself, and now Juliet wakes up and she sees that her love is dead, and oh, now she kills herself. So there's all these little things that happen that stop our characters from getting the end that they desire. So your rising action in your speech and the story that you tell should be a series of sequential challenges. And if this Romeo and Juliet stuff is going over your head, think about the Wizard of Oz too, right? She just wants to go home, but now she's got to bring the Scarecrow and get him his brain. And now she's got to bring the Tin Man and get him his heart. And now she's got to bring the Lion and get him his courage. And now the wizard wants the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West before he can send her home. And then the blimp goes off without Dorothy on it. All of these things happen that stop Dorothy from going home or stop Romeo and Juliet from falling in love. And really stop Harry Potter from having a happily ever after. All right, so all of those series of sequential events happen that lead us to our climax. What is the big moment of the story? The thing that we've been waiting for, right? In Romeo and Juliet, you can argue that Romeo meets Juliet and then kills himself, and then Juliet sees Romeo dead and then kills herself. That's kind of like the thing that, how are they gonna end together? Unfortunately, they end in death. The climax is Dorothy getting to the wizard, and then the balloon goes off, and then, oh no, she's not on it, but she can tap her heels 3 times and go home. Okay? The climax of Harry Potter is at the end of the 7th book, the end of the 7th movie. Voldemort and Harry finally come face to face. They're surrounded by all the Death Eaters, and they're going to duel to the death. That's the climax, the thing that your story has been building up to. All right, then that happens, and that sends your characters into the falling action. I want you to think of the falling action as all of the pieces of your story falling into place. This is kind of the aftermath of the duel between Harry and Voldemort. It's the aftermath of returning home after clicking her heels with Dorothy. It's the aftermath of Romeo and Juliet killing themselves. What happens to the families? Well, they realize that they spent way too much time hating each other, and it brought about the death, or as Mercutio said, the plague on both of their houses, which led to their demise, right? So they decide to create a treaty and vow to love each other in the city of Verona. So it's the falling action, the thing that happens at the end of the climax, which then leads us to the resolution. And that's the end of the story, or the moral of the story, right? The moral of the story is, love should always conquer hate for Romeo and Juliet. There's no place like home for Wizard of Oz. And love conquers all in Harry Potter. Sorry, spoiler alert. But if you noticed that the resolution is here and the exposition and stasis is here. So they're at different levels, because really at the end of the story arc, Shouldn't it go all the way up and then come all the way back down to where we were and then keep going? Well, no, because while your rising action, climax, and falling action is that movement through time, the first critical, essential thing that every narration has to have, the resolution, is the change. It's at a different level. It's higher because our characters have achieved this new normal, this better state of being. They're different. They're better than who they were from the beginning. The world is better without Voldemort. Dorothy realized that everything she ever wanted was the thing that she hated in the beginning of the story. So she's elevated at the end. The city of Verona is changed forever because of these two star-crossed lovers. So this resolution always needs to be at a different level than the exposition because of that element of change. Okay? I promise this is iced tea. It's not actually beer. I would never drink beer and teach. The last thing that I want to talk about today is the elements of the narration. So we know the story arc outline. We know that your narration could be case studies, histories, or stories. You know, the two have to be true. Stories can be fake. But really, what's the DNA? What's the guts and the skeleton and the veins and the muscles of a story? Well, if the story arc outline is our skeletal system, the thing that holds us up, the elements of the narration are all of our internal workings, our organs, our blood, our nervous system, all of those things. So every story needs a plot, all right? This is the what happens in a story. It's always time focused. We know that from the story arc outline, right? We're going towards something, all right? And you need that series of sequential changes, those challenges, all right? The series of sequential changes always happen because of a plot thickening at the start of the story, the challenge, the thing that pulls our characters out of stasis or the state of being. All right, this is our rising action, our climax, and our falling action. So your plot is the thing that we're building to, the thing that happens, and the thing that happens because of what the big thing happened means, if that makes sense. Next, we have our characters. Your characters are who the plot happens to. Your characters do not have to be human, but they do need to be human-like. So if your character is a tornado, you need to explain that tornado's characteristics like human characteristics. The tornado was angry and she ripped houses as she ran through the town, screaming at the top of her lungs. These are things that humans do. It's just happening to a non-human character. So your characters, if they're not human, need to have human-like qualities, human-like emotions, human-like flaws to them, because if your audience can't see themselves in your characters, then they're not going to listen to you anymore. They're not going to feel connected to your story, all right? And then finally, every story needs a setting. This is the where, the when, and the what happened before, all right? And your setting should be detailed. Think about Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling spends pages, chapters even, explaining what the castle looks like and the wood of the wand and how the books smell when the students open and turn the pages for the first time. She goes into detail about Dumbledore's beard and his half-crescent moon-shaped glasses. Now, your narrations aren't going to be that long, right? You're only going to be giving a 3 to 5 minute speech here. So you can't be super detailed, but, you know, spending a minute on explaining how one of your characters' freckles sit on their face might not be a good idea. But not telling us that that character has freckles might also not be a good idea. So you do want to be detailed and descriptive, but you got to be smart about what those details are, okay? All right, so now that you kind of know what a narration is, I want to show you a clip from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I believe this is from part 1. And this is a clip where Hermione kind of explains the tale of the 3 brothers. The Deathly Hallows are 3 things. It's an Elder Wand, it's a Resurrection Stone, and it's an invisibility cloak. the person who owns all three of those Deathly Hallows can essentially conquer the world. It's kind of like the Holy Grail in Harry Potter. You don't really need to understand that, but what I do want you to figure out while we're watching this clip is take note of the plot. What do you think the series of sequential changes are? What's the challenge that pulls our characters out of stasis? What is the setting and who are our characters? What's the climax? What's the thing that the story builds up to the whole time? And then after the climax, obviously, what's the falling action, the pieces that fall into place, and what's the resolution, the new normal, the moral of the story? I'm obviously going to be talking about these things, but see if you can catch them in your notes. And when I explain in the next slide, see if what you wrote matches the correct answers. So let's play this. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it. My computer's humming a little bit. And again, I'm sorry for the lag. I'm sharing the screen on Zoom, so hopefully this works.
Do you want to read it?
No.
There were once 3 brothers who were traveling along a lonely, winding road at twilight. In time, the brothers reached a river too treacherous to pass. But being learned in the magical arts, the 3 brothers simply waved their wands and made a bridge. Before they could cross, however, they found their path blocked by a hooded figure. It was Death, and he felt cheated. Cheated because travelers would normally drown in the river, but Death was cunning. He pretended to congratulate the 3 brothers on their magic, and said that each had earned a prize for having been clever enough to evade him. The oldest asked for a wand more powerful than any in existence, so Death fashioned him one from an elder tree that stood nearby. The second brother decided he wanted to humiliate Death even further and asked for the power to recall loved ones from the grave. So Death plucked a stone from the river and offered it to him. Finally, Death turned to the third brother. A humble man, he asked for something that would allow him to go forth from that place without being followed by Death. And so it was that Death reluctantly handed over his own cloak of invisibility. The first brother traveled to a distant village, where with the elder wand in hand, he killed a wizard with whom he had once quarreled. Drunk with the power that the elder wand had given him, he bragged of his invincibility. But that night, another wizard stole the wand and slit the brother's throat for good measure. And so Death took the first brother for his own. The second brother journeyed to his home, where he took the stone and turned it thrice in hand. To his delight, the girl he had once hoped to marry before her untimely death appeared before him. Yet soon she turned sad and cold, for she did not belong in the mortal world. Driven mad with hopeless longing, the second brother killed himself so as to join her. And so Death took the second brother. As for the third brother, Death searched for many years but was never able to find him. Only when he attained a great age did the youngest brother shed the cloak of invisibility and give it to his son. He then greeted Death as an old friend and went with him gladly, departing this life as equals.
All right. So in class, I like to show that clip twice. She does go very fast. But since this is a video lecture, you could rewatch it if you want, you know, just kind of reverse a little bit. Reverse, look at me aging myself. Click back a couple of seconds and you can rewatch it and get some of those things in your notes. But I do want to talk about what we saw and all of the elements of the story. So this was the plot and these are the characters and blah, blah, blah. Because for your homework assignment this week, you're going to be listening to stories, so you won't have a visual aspect of it to follow along with, and you're going to have to identify all of the elements of the narration in the stories that you'll listen to. It's about an hour-long podcast, and you'll have an assignment that's associated with all the stories that you hear in that podcast. So I just want to leave this video lecture knowing that we've heard a story, we've identified all of the elements of it, we've plugged it into the story arc outline. So when you do that assignment, you've had practice with it, you've seen me do it, and then that'll help you in turn writing your own narrations for your speech. So before I really talk about the story arc outline and all of the elements of the story, I did want to bring to your attention the kind of creative use of language Hermione uses throughout the story. She's very eloquent in the way that she speaks. She's detailed and descriptive, but only enough. She doesn't go on and on and on about how lustful the first brother is with how much power that wand gave him, right? She says drunk with the power of the Elder Wand. It's a pretty charged statement. Saying that you're drunk with something has an emotional charge to it, right? If I'm drunk with power, that stirs something up in my audience when they hear me say that. We know what being drunk is like. So to say drunk with power is a pretty bold statement. So as you're writing your narrations and you're thinking of like language to use and things to make you sound succinct and descriptive without being overtly descriptive, think of the things that Hermione used, right? He's drunk with power. He turned the stone thrice in hand. So she uses very specific words and very kind of literary terms to get her points across, I think, in a very creative and beautiful, for lack of better terms, way. So as you're writing your stories, try to write them like Hermione and be a little bit more out of the box with your language. But we're going to talk about language and delivery next week. But I did just kind of want to draw your attention to that now. So if you do go back and rewatch this, listen to how she describes things, because I think the language that she uses is very beautiful. All right, but first, our setting of our story here, right? It's the where are we, when are we, what happened before. You know, it's the very first sentence Hermione says, a winding road at twilight. You could say that we're in the wizarding world, we're in a forest. Where are our characters, all right? Well, we're on a winding road at twilight. Then the rest of the story kind of takes place in the wizarding world. Our characters are the three brothers and Death, right? So we've got three brothers and Death as the main characters. Our challenge, I hope you can see that because on my screen I'm right there, but our challenge is Death, right? Death is the person that pulls our characters from stasis. They're traveling on a winding road and then a bridge, a broken bridge is there. And that would normally be the challenge for muggles or non-magic folk. But because these three brothers were wizards and they're skilled in the magical arts, they simply waved their wands, repaired the bridge, and were able to go on their way. So they fixed this thing. So their stasis stayed the same. Then Death appears and goes, oh, I felt cheated. So that bridge and Death's reaction to them crossing the bridge is really the challenge, the thing that pulls our characters out of stasis. It stops our brothers from the ending that they would have gotten and starts them on a new journey, all right, which is that rising action. So our rising action is brother 1 and brother 2's death, but our climax is the third brother's death. And that might have been a little difficult to see what the climax is because it is a fast story and there's nothing super crazy that happens. But once the first brother dies, something in your head kind of clicks. And as an audience member, you're sitting there going, oh, they asked for these powers to make them better, but these powers that Death gave them are ultimately going to lead to their demise. So we saw how brother 1 gets it, how's brother 2 gonna get it? And then we listen to the story about brother 2 and how he brings back his loved one that dies. And ultimately that brings so much sadness that he kills himself. So now we're like, all right, brother 2 got 86th. How's brother 3 gonna bite it in the butt? And there's a wonderful moment in this story where Death is literally going, where are you? Where are you? I can't find you, right? Because the third brother has the invisibility cloak on. That's exactly what you want your audience to be doing as you're leading to the climax. Where's the climax? All of these crazy things are happening. How is this going to end? You want your audience to be Death looking all over the world for that third brother. And then when the third brother takes off the cloak, that's when Death finds him. How's the third brother going to get it? Actually, unclimactically, he just dies of old age because he's been able to hide from Death for so long, right? But the story builds up to how is that third brother, the wise one, the humble man, right? How is he going to die? Well, he dies like this. The falling action is the son taking the cloak from his dad, and then Death and the third brother kind of departing as equals. And really the resolution is they all die. But if we think of the resolution as the moral, what's the thing that we learned here? The thing that's changed? Well, you can't cheat death, all right? That could be a moral that you take out of this story. No matter what, everyone's going to die somehow. And though they thought they cheated death, they really got it anyways. So for your speeches, you're going to have to come up with a moral or something that we're supposed to learn, all right? Then your story explains how we learn that in either a case study, a history, or a story. All right, so that is all I have for this week's video lecture. I hope you enjoyed it. I really love theming this lecture to Harry Potter. I hope you've enjoyed spending time with me in the Slytherin common room. And you have quite a lot of assignments, not a lot of assignments, but your assignment for this week is going to take some time. So this is not something that I would start at 11 o'clock on Sunday because it is an hour-long podcast. And then the assignment that's attached to this podcast is probably going to also take you an hour, 45 minutes to finish. So if you don't listen to the stories and take notes, then you're going to have a hard time doing the assignment. So as always, as you're watching and taking notes of this video lecture, as you're starting the assignment, when you're listening to the podcast that I give you, if you have any questions, please let me know. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you next week to learn about language and delivery. Bye, everybody.